The blood wine hit the marble floor with a wet crack, and the silence that followed was sharp enough to kill. Nora Pemberton's hands trembled as crimson liquid soaked into the hem of her ivory gown, the one she'd spent 3 months' salary on, the one that was supposed to make her feel beautiful tonight. The laughter started immediately, high, cruel, cutting through the grand hall like shattered glass. She didn't need to look up to know every noble at the long table was staring, their pale faces twisted with amusement, their ancient eyes glittering with malice. "How clumsy," Lady Seraphine's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Though I suppose when one is built like a peasant workhorse, grace becomes rather difficult to manage." The other nobles erupted into fresh laughter. Nora's cheeks burned hot enough to hurt. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor along with the spilled wine. This had been a mistake. Coming here had been a catastrophic, horrible mistake. She'd known it from the moment Elias Lorentis had appeared at her apartment 3 weeks ago, all impossible beauty and dark promises, asking her to be his date to the midwinter court gathering. She'd thought it was a prank at first. Vampire kings didn't date human women who worked double shifts at the library and wore a size 16. Vampire kings didn't look at girls like her with heat in their silver eyes and say things like, "You're exactly what I've been searching for." But he had, and like a fool, she'd believed him. Now she stood in the greatest vampire stronghold in North America, the Obsidian Palace hidden beneath the streets of Chicago, surrounded by creatures who'd been beautiful and deadly for centuries, and they were laughing at her body, at her audacity to exist in their perfect, terrible world. "Perhaps we should have the servants bring her a bucket and mop," Lord Corvinus suggested, his white hair catching the candlelight, "since she's already dressed for the part." Nora's throat tightened. She wouldn't cry. She refused to give them that satisfaction. But her eyes were burning, and her hands were still shaking, and she couldn't remember ever feeling this small. Then the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The laughter cut off like someone had sliced through it with a blade. Every vampire at the table went rigid, their predatory instincts suddenly screaming danger. Nora felt it too, a presence behind her, vast and cold and absolutely furious. "Say that again." Elias's voice was soft, deadly, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Nora turned slowly. She'd thought Elias was beautiful before, inhumanly so, with his white hair that fell past his shoulders, his marble-pale skin, his features that looked carved by an artist's loving hand. But she'd never seen him like this. Power radiated from him in waves, making the air itself seem to warp. His silver eyes had gone completely black, and when he smiled, his fangs were very, very visible. "Lord Corvinus," Elias continued in that same terrifying whisper, "I don't believe I heard you correctly. Would you care to repeat your observation about my intended bride?" The word bride sent a shock through Nora's system, but she didn't have time to process it. Lord Corvinus had gone absolutely white, which was saying something for a vampire. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect. You meant every word." Elias moved past Nora with fluid, inhuman grace. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every vampire in the room understood what was happening, and none of them dared move. "You looked at the woman I have chosen, the woman I have brought into my home and introduced to my court, and you decided she was worthy of your contempt." "She's human," Lady Seraphine tried, her voice shaking. "Surely you can't expect us to do what?" Elias's head turned toward her with the mechanical precision of a predator tracking prey. "To show basic courtesy? To remember that I am your king, and my choices are not yours to question?" He was at the table now, standing at its head, looking down at the dozen nobles who'd been so amused moments ago. "Or perhaps you believe your bloodlines make you exempt from consequences. Shall we test that theory?" Nobody spoke. Nora could hear her own heartbeat, loud and human and desperately alive. Elias placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. The ancient wood groaned under his grip. "For 800 years I have led this court. I have protected you through wars, through hunts, through the chaos of modernization. I have asked very little in return. Loyalty, discretion, respect." His voice dropped even lower. "But it seems I have been too lenient. You've forgotten what happens when you displease me. Your Majesty, please." Lord Corvinus started. The table exploded. Nora gasped as the massive piece of furniture it must have weighed 1,000 pounds shattered under Elias's hands, sending nobles scrambling backward. Wine and blood and broken wood flew everywhere. The destruction was so sudden, so absolute, that for a moment nobody moved. Then Elias spoke again, and this time his voice carried the weight of absolute command. "You are banished, all of you. Corvinus, Seraphine, Matthias, Draven, Celestine, every single vampire who laughed at my chosen tonight. You have 48 hours to leave my territory. If I see your faces after that deadline, I will kill you myself and your houses will burn with you." "You can't," Seraphine started. I am the vampire king of the Northern Territories. Elias's eyes blazed with power that made Nora's bones ache. I can do anything I wish, and what I wish is to never see your contemptible faces again. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind and simply end you here. They ran. Centuries-old vampires with more power in their smallest finger than Nora had in her entire body, and they ran like frightened children. Within seconds, the grand hall was empty except for Nora, Elias, and the ruins of the table. The silence stretched. Nora's mind was reeling. Bride, banishment, violence that came as naturally as breathing. This was real. This was happening. And Elias, he turned to her, and the rage vanished from his face like it had never been there. Are you hurt? Nora couldn't speak, she just shook her head. Elias crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising gentleness. His skin was cold, but his touch was careful, reverent almost. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated this. I knew some of the older nobles would resist, but I thought they'd have the sense to keep their poison to themselves. You called me your bride, Nora whispered. Something flickered in his silver eyes. I did. We've known each other for 3 weeks. I've lived for 8 centuries, Nora. I don't need years to recognize what I want. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and despite everything, the chaos, the fear, the sheer insanity of this night, Nora felt her breath catch. From the moment I saw you in that library reading Brana with your coffee and your concentration, I knew. You were real, genuine, alive in a way I'd forgotten humans could be. And I wanted you more than I've wanted anything in 300 years. I'm not, Nora's voice cracked. I'm not special, Elias. I'm just a girl who works at a library and can't even hold a wine glass without spilling it. Those vampires, they were right. I don't belong in your world. They were wrong about everything. Elias's voice was fierce. You belong exactly where I want you. And I want you here, with me always. He pressed his forehead to hers, his white hair falling around them like a curtain. I meant what I said. I want you as my bride, my queen, my partner in all things, but only if you want it too. Nora's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. This was crazy. This was impossible. She barely knew him, barely understood his world, barely felt qualified to date him, let alone marry him. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her breath stop. Vulnerability. Hope. This ancient, powerful being who'd just destroyed a table with his bare hands and banished a dozen nobles without hesitation was looking at her, like she held his entire heart in her trembling hands. I want to know you, she said finally. The real you. Not just the vampire king who shows up at my door with flowers and poetry. I want to know what you're afraid of, what you dream about, what you do when you're alone. She took a shaky breath. I want to know if this is real. If you really see me, all of me, or if this is just some fantasy that'll break the moment you realize I'm not some perfect princess from a fairy tale. Elias pulled back just enough to look at her properly. Then he smiled, and it was the first real, unguarded expression she'd seen from him all night. I'm afraid of losing you before I've had a chance to prove myself. I dream about mornings where I wake up next to you, even though I haven't slept in centuries. And when I'm alone, I read the books you've recommended and try to understand how you see the world, because your perspective is the most fascinating thing I've encountered in 800 years. His hand slid down to take hers, his cold fingers threading through her warm ones. I see you, Nora Pemberton, every curve, every insecurity, every brilliant thought that crosses your mind, and I want all of it. The tears came then, hot and fast and utterly beyond her control. But they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were something else, something overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Elias wiped them away with his thumbs, his touch impossibly gentle. Let me court you properly. Let me show you my world, the real parts, not just the political theater. Give me a chance to earn your trust, your affection, your love. And if at the end of it you decide this isn't what you want, I'll let you go. I swear it. Nora knew she should be sensible. She should go home, process everything that had happened, maybe talk to a therapist about dating immortal vampire kings. But sensible had never gotten her anything but lonely nights and safe choices that left her feeling empty. And this dangerous, impossible, ridiculous thing felt more right than anything she'd experienced in her 26 years. Okay, she whispered, show me. Elias's smile could have lit up the darkness. Then let's get you out of that wine-soaked gown and into something comfortable. I have 800 years of stories to tell you, and we should probably start somewhere more private than a destroyed banquet hall. He offered his hand, and Nora took it. As they walked through the obsidian halls of his palace, past tapestries that depicted centuries of vampire history and windows that looked out onto an underground city that shouldn't exist, Nora felt the first flutter of something that might have been destiny. Or madness. Possibly both. Either way, she was in it now, and surprisingly, she didn't want to leave. The private chambers Elias led her to were nothing like the cold grandeur of the public halls. Here, the stone walls were covered in tapestries and paintings that looked genuinely lived in rather than displayed. Books overflowed from shelves, stacked in piles on every available surface. A massive window showed what looked like a garden, though Nora couldn't figure out how plants grew this far underground. The furniture was old but comfortable, clearly chosen for actual use rather than intimidation. "This is where I spend most of my time," Elias explained, watching her take it all in. "The throne room and banquet halls are necessary for appearances, but this is home." Nora moved toward the bookshelves, her librarian instincts immediately cataloging titles. First editions of Stoker, Shelley, Byron. Poetry in languages she couldn't read. Modern paperbacks sitting next to ancient manuscripts. "You really do read everything." "I have a lot of time." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the cold emanating from his body. "And recently I've been focusing on your recommendations." Pride and Prejudice was illuminating. I hadn't realized how much human courtship rituals have changed. Despite everything, Nora found herself almost smiling. "I can't imagine you doing the whole Regency-era dance of propriety. I would if you asked." His voice was serious. "I'd learn whatever customs, follow whatever rules would make you feel cherished." The weight of his sincerity made her chest tight. "You destroyed a table and banished a dozen vampires for me tonight. I think you've already made your feelings clear." They deserved worse. The cold rage flickered back into his eyes for just a moment. "Nobody speaks about you that way. Not in my presence, not in my territory, not anywhere in this world. I won't tolerate it." Nora turned to face him fully. "You called me your bride in front of your entire court. Was that just to make a point, or did you mean it?" "I meant every word." Elias stepped closer, his hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw. "In vampire culture, declaring someone your intended is binding. It's not a casual statement. By naming you my bride before witnesses, I've made a formal claim. Every vampire in the Northern Territories now knows you're under my protection, my partnership, my devotion." "You barely know me," Nora protested weakly, even as her skin tingled under his touch. "I know enough. I know you're kind to people who can't offer you anything in return. I've watched you help elderly patrons find books, spend your lunch breaks reading to children, stay late to organize donation drives. I know you're brilliant. Your thesis on feminine archetypes in Victorian literature was published in 3 academic journals. I know you bite your lip when you're thinking, drink too much coffee, and cry at sad endings even when you know they're coming." His thumb brushed her lower lip and Nora's breath stuttered. "I know you see beauty in old things, broken things, things the world has overlooked. And I know that when you smile at me, really smile, it's the closest I've felt to alive in centuries. You've been watching me?" She should probably be alarmed by that. She definitely wasn't. "For 6 months before I approached you." Elias had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I wanted to be sure. Vampires mate for eternity, Nora. When we choose, it's forever. I couldn't risk approaching you until I was certain you were what I believed you to be. And what's that? Everything." The word was simple, absolute. "My match. My balance. My reason to care about the next 800 years." Nora's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the cold of him through his shirt. No heartbeat. A body that had been frozen in time for centuries, powerful and deadly and inhumanly beautiful. "What if I get old? What if I'm wrinkled and gray and you still look like you walked out of a painting? Then I'll love every wrinkle, every gray hair, every year that you lived and loved and grew. And when you're ready, if you choose it, I'll offer you eternity. But that's your decision, Nora. Not tonight, not soon. Whenever you're ready, or never if that's what you want." His hand settled on her waist, careful and possessive at once. "I'll take whatever you give me. 50 human years or 5,000 immortal ones. As long as they're with you." "That's insane." But she was leaning into him now, drawn by some gravity she couldn't name. Perhaps his smile was soft, almost boyish despite his ancient eyes. "But I've been sane and alone for 8 centuries. I much prefer insane and with you." Nora laughed, and it felt like releasing something she'd been holding too tight for too long. "You're very confident for someone who just met me 3 weeks ago. I'm a vampire king. Confidence comes with the territory." But then his expression shifted, becoming more vulnerable. "Though I confess you terrify me more than any enemy I've faced. You have the power to reject me, to walk away, to choose someone else, and I'd have to let you, because forcing you would destroy everything I love about you." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Nora looked up at this impossible creature who could snap her in half without effort, but was standing here telling her he was frightened, and she made a choice. She stood on her toes and kissed him. Elias made a sound somewhere between surprise and relief, his arms coming around her to pull her close. His lips were cold but soft, moving against hers with centuries of experience tempered by careful restraint. He kissed her like she was precious, like she might break, like he wanted to devour her but was holding himself back by sheer force of will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora was breathing hard. Elias just looked overwhelmed. He rested his forehead against hers. "That was unexpected," he murmured. "You just gave me a speech about being terrified I'd reject you. I thought I'd put you out of your misery." Nora's hands were still on his chest, feeling the cold solidity of him. "But I need you to understand something. I don't know anything about being a vampire queen. I barely know how to be in your world. I'm going to make mistakes, probably embarrass you, definitely spill things. You could never embarrass me." His voice was fierce. "You're going to walk into rooms and make other women feel plain by comparison. You're going to speak and make people realize how empty their centuries have been. You're going to exist, Nora, in all your warm, living, beautiful humanity, and you're going to change everything." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you've already changed me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "Stay tonight. Let me show you that this is real. Let me prove I see you." Nora knew she should go home, process, think. But when she looked into Elias's silver eyes, she saw something that made all her doubts feel small and distant. She saw forever looking back at her, patient and devoted and utterly certain. "Show me your world," she said softly. "All of it. The beautiful parts and the dangerous ones. I want to understand." Elias's smile was radiant. "Then let's start with getting you into dry clothes, and I'll tell you about the night I was turned. It's not a cheerful story, but it's the beginning of everything that led me to you." As he led her toward what she assumed was a bedroom, Nora felt the last of her reservations crumbling. This was crazy. This was impossible. This was exactly what she'd been waiting for her entire life without knowing it, and she was absolutely, terrifyingly ready for it. The bedroom was less medieval dungeon and more cozy sanctuary than Nora expected. Dark wood furniture, soft rugs, lamps that cast warm light despite being underground. Elias pulled out clothes from a wardrobe. His shirt would be massive on her, but it was soft and clean, and the silk pajama pants had drawstrings. "I'll wait outside while you change," he said. "Ever the gentleman." "You're 800 years old. I think you've seen a woman in a bra before." His eyes darkened with heat. "Not you. And I'm trying very hard to court you properly rather than pin you to that wall and kiss every inch of skin I've been fantasizing about for 6 months. Nora's face burned, but a thrill ran through her at the hunger in his voice. "Rain, check on that last part, but you can stay while I change. I trust you." Something in his expression softened at those words. He turned his back anyway, giving her privacy she hadn't asked for, and Nora felt a surge of affection so strong it almost hurt. She stripped out of the ruined gown and into his clothes, swimming in fabric that smelled like him, cold stone and old books and something indefinably masculine. "Okay, I'm decent." Elias turned, and the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in any world. "You're devastating," he corrected. Then he held out his hand. "Come, there's someone I want you to meet." He led her through winding corridors, down stairs that seemed to spiral forever, until they emerged into the underground garden she'd glimpsed from his window. It was impossible, and magical trees growing without sunlight, flowers blooming in shades that didn't exist in nature, a small pond with water so clear it looked like glass. And sitting on a bench reading by lamplight was another vampire. She was younger looking than Elias, with the same white hair and pale skin but delicate, almost fragile features. When she saw them approaching, her face lit up. "Elias, you actually brought her." She was on her feet in an instant, moving with that same inhuman grace. "I'm Isadora, Elias's little sister. Well, not by blood, but he's been my brother for 400 years, so it counts." Nora blinked. "Sister?" "I found her dying of plague in Venice," Elias explained, his hand still holding Nora's. "She was 15, brilliant, and refused to go quietly into death, so I turned her. She's been a terror ever since. I prefer delightfully unpredictable." Isadora circled Nora with obvious curiosity. "You're the one who made my brother smile." "Actually smile. Not that polite thing he does for court. I've been dying to meet you." "Dying is poor phrasing for a vampire," Elias said dryly. "You know what I mean." Isadora grabbed Nora's free hand. "Tell me everything. How did he approach you? Was he awkward?" "He was awkward, wasn't he? He hasn't courted anyone since the 1700s, and that ended badly." "Isadora," Elias warned. "What?" "She should know what she's getting into. You're legendary for being brooding and dramatic. Someone needs to warn her." Despite the insanity of the situation, Nora found herself laughing. "He showed up at my library with a first edition of Jane Eyre and asked if I'd like to discuss the Gothic themes over coffee." Isadora's eyes went wide. "He used a book as a pickup line? Oh, that's perfect. That's so perfectly Elias I could die again. I'm starting to regret this introduction." Elias muttered, but there was warmth in his voice. Isadora ignored him, pulling Nora toward the bench. Sit. Tell me everything. Especially the part about tonight. I heard he destroyed the council table and banished half the court. Is that true? They insulted her, Elias said quietly, all trace of humor gone. They mocked her in my own hall, in front of witnesses, with the explicit intention of humiliating her. What did you expect me to do? Exactly what you did. Isadora's voice was suddenly serious. Those nobles have been insufferable for centuries. They needed to remember who's in charge. She turned to Nora. He did the right thing. In vampire culture, disrespecting someone's chosen is grounds for challenge. He showed mercy by only banishing them. Mercy. The word felt strange. Nora looked at Elias, seeing him in a new light. You could have killed them easily. But I'm trying not to terrify you. His slight smile was self-deprecating. Though I'm not sure I'm succeeding. Nora stood, moving to stand in front of him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You don't terrify me. This world does a little. The politics and power and immortality, but you? She took his cold hands in her warm ones. You make me feel safe, even when you're destroying furniture and banishing ancient vampires. Maybe especially then. Elias's expression was somewhere between awed and undone. You're going to ruin me. Good, Isadora said cheerfully. He needs ruining. He's been too composed for too long. It's creepy. They spent hours in that impossible garden, talking and laughing while Isadora told stories about Elias's past, some embarrassing, some heartbreaking, all painting a picture of a vampire who'd lived through centuries of change and violence and loss but had somehow maintained his capacity for love, for caring, for hope. He nearly died in the vampire wars of 1812, Isadora said at one point, her voice soft. He threw himself in front of a solar weapon to save 50 fledgling vampires who couldn't defend themselves. Burned half his body beyond recognition. Took him a month to heal, and he was in agony the entire time. Nora looked at Elias with new eyes. You never mentioned that. He shrugged, uncomfortable. It was a long time ago. He did things like that constantly, Isadora continued. Took in vampires other kings would have killed. Protected humans when it was dangerous to do so. Rewrote half our laws to be more humane. He's not just a vampire king, Nora. He's a good king. The kind that comes around maybe once in a millennium. Isadora, Elias started. She should know. Isadora's eyes were fierce. She should know exactly who you are before she decides whether to stay. The weight of that statement settled over them. Nora looked at this vampire who'd turned a dying girl out of compassion, who'd risked himself for others, who'd spent 8 centuries trying to build something better than the violence and cruelty that defined his kind. And she looked at the way he was watching her, hopeful and vulnerable and trying so hard not to push. I'm staying, she said quietly. At least for tonight. We can figure out the rest as we go. The relief in Elias's eyes was almost painful to witness. Isadora beamed and clapped her hands. Excellent. Then I'm going to leave you two alone before I accidentally reveal more embarrassing stories. But Nora? She paused at the garden entrance. Welcome to the family. We're completely insane, but we're loyal to the death. Well, you know what I mean. After she left, the garden felt smaller, more intimate. Elias pulled Nora close, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out at the impossible flowers. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. For what? For giving me a chance. For not running when you saw what I am, what my world is. For being brave enough to stay. Nora leaned back into his cold embrace. I'm terrified, you know. This is the craziest thing I've ever done. But I'm also more alive than I've felt in years. So maybe crazy is exactly what I need. They stood there in comfortable silence for a long moment. Then Nora asked the question that had been nagging at her. Those vampires tonight, Seraphine and the others, why did they hate me so much? Just because I'm human? Partially. Elias's voice was dark, but mostly because you represent change. The old families want to maintain traditional power structures, human servants, not partners, arranged unions for political gain, not love matches. By choosing you a human, an outsider, someone with no vampire lineage or political connections, I'm threatening everything they believe about how our world should work. So by being with you, I'm making a political statement. By being with me, you're starting a revolution. His arms tightened around her. Which is why I'll understand if you decide this is too much. I won't blame you for wanting a simpler life. Nora turned in his arms, looking up at him seriously. I didn't go into library science because I wanted simple. I did it because I believe in stories and the power of narratives to change hearts and minds. And this? She gestured around them. This is the greatest story I've ever been part of. Vampire King falls for ordinary human girl and changes his entire world for her. That's epic, Elias. That's the kind of story that matters. You're not ordinary. His voice was rough with emotion. You're extraordinary, and you're going to change far more than just my world. He kissed her then, deeper than before, with less restraint. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head to give him better access, and Nora made a sound that was probably embarrassing, but couldn't bring herself to care. He tasted like night and winter and something darkly sweet, and she wanted more, wanted everything, wanted to drown in the cold intensity of him. When they finally broke apart, both trembling, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you back to my chambers. Let you sleep. You've had an exhausting night." "I don't want to sleep." Nora's hands fisted in his shirt. "I want to stay here with you. I want you to tell me more stories. I want to know everything about you, your fears, your dreams, your regrets. I want to understand who you are behind the crown and the power." Something in his expression cracked open, revealing a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "I'm afraid I'll disappoint you, that you'll see too much of the monster and not enough of the man." "Then let me see it all." She cupped his face in her hands, warm against cold. "Let me decide what I can handle. Don't protect me from the truth, Elias. I'm stronger than I look." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but not here. If I'm going to bare my soul, I'd prefer to do it somewhere more comfortable." They made their way back to his chambers, and Elias built a fire in the stone fireplace unnecessary for him, but clearly meant for her comfort. They settled on a massive couch, Nora curled against his side, and he began to talk. He told her about his human life, first growing up in medieval England, the son of a minor lord, watching his family, torn apart by plague and war. About the night a vampire attacked him, meaning to kill, but something in Elias's defiant rage made her pause. About waking up 3 days later as something powerful and hungry and terrifying. "I hated what I'd become," he said quietly, his fingers tracing absent patterns on Nora's arm. "I tried to resist the bloodlust, nearly starved myself to death. Multiple times. But the vampire who turned me," her name was Morgana, "she taught me that being a monster wasn't about what you are, but what you choose to do with your power." "What happened to her?" Nora asked. "She died protecting me from hunters. 300 years after she turned me, when I was strong enough to have protected myself, she still threw herself in front of the stake meant for my heart." His voice was distant with old pain. "She taught me that vampires could love, could sacrifice, could be more than just predators. Everything I've tried to build, every law I've changed, it's because of her." Nora pressed closer, offering wordless comfort. "Tell me about the hardest thing you've ever done." He was quiet for a long moment. "Killing Marcus." "Who was Marcus?" "My best friend. Human, mortal. Someone I'd known since childhood who survived the plague that killed my family. He found me after I was turned, recognized me despite the changes. And I was so lonely, so desperate for connection that I let him into my new life." Elias's voice was hollow. "For 20 years we were brothers. He aged, I didn't, but it didn't matter. Until the night he begged me to turn him. To give him immortality so we'd never have to be separated." Nora could guess where this was going, but she stayed quiet, letting him tell it. "I refused. He was married, had children, had a full human life ahead of him. I wouldn't take that from him. So he went to another vampire, a cruel one, who turned him wrong, left him mad with bloodlust. And Marcus, he slaughtered his entire village, his wife, his children. 300 people dead in a single night." Elias's hands were shaking. "I tracked him down, and I ended him. Because it was my fault he'd become that monster, and I owed him a clean death." "It wasn't your fault," Nora said firmly. "He made his choice. The other vampire made their choice. You're not responsible for everyone else's decisions." "Aren't I? I'm the king, the most powerful vampire in the territory. If I'd turned him properly, kept him safe, then you would have taken away his humanity whether he truly understood the cost or not. You would have condemned him to watch everyone he loved die while he stayed frozen in time. You made the hard choice, Elias, the kind choice." Nora shifted to look up at him. "And then you spent how many centuries making sure no vampire was ever turned improperly again? Changing the laws, enforcing protections for fledglings." He looked startled. "How did you know that?" "Because I know you. Even with only 3 weeks and one disastrous dinner, I know you're someone who turns pain into purpose, who sees suffering and tries to fix it rather than just accept it." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "You're not a monster, Elias Lorentis. You're a man who became something terrible and decided to be good anyway. That's about the bravest thing I can imagine." He pulled her into his lap then, holding her so tight it almost hurt, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not here, because you deserve me. I'm here because I want to be." She pulled back just enough to kiss him, soft and sweet. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Not until you're sick of me, then you're never leaving." His smile was shaky but genuine. "Because I'll never be sick of you. Not in 1,000 years, not in 10,000. They talked through the night, Nora asking questions and Elias answering with a honesty that felt like trust being built in real time. He told her about vampire politics, the different territories, the uneasy alliances, the ancient feuds that sometimes erupted into violence, about the modern challenges of hiding an entire supernatural species in a world of cameras and social media, about the loneliness of immortality, watching centuries pass while everyone you loved crumbled to dust. "Is that why you want me?" Nora asked quietly, as the sky outside began to lighten, though no sunlight reached this deep underground. "Because I'm temporary? A brief flash of warmth in an endless cold night?" "No." Elias's voice was absolute. "I want you because you make me remember what it feels like to hope. Because when I look at you, I don't see a temporary anything. I see eternity if you'll have it. And if you won't, if you choose to stay human and live your natural life, then I see 50 years of joy that will sustain me through the next 1,000. Either way, you're not temporary. You're everything." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "How are you real? How is any of this real? I ask myself the same question every time you look at me." He wiped her tears away with cold thumbs. "You should sleep. The sun is up and you're exhausted. Will you stay with me?" "Always." He carried her to his massive bed, settling her under covers that felt like silk and clouds. Then he lay beside her outside the covers, one arm draped protectively over her waist. "Sleep, my heart. I'll keep you safe." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to stay awake and squeeze every moment out of this impossible night. But exhaustion pulled at her, and Elias's presence was so solid, so reassuring that she felt herself slipping away. Just before she fell asleep, she murmured, "I think I'm falling in love with you." She didn't hear his response, but she felt him press a kiss to her temple, felt the way his arm tightened around her, and knew without words that he felt the same. When Nora woke, it took her several confused moments to remember where she was. The bed was too big, too comfortable, and the arm around her waist was too cold. Then everything came rushing back: the disastrous dinner, Elias's protection, the long night of stories and kisses and revelations. She turned carefully, expecting to find Elias asleep beside her. Instead, he was awake and watching her with an expression so tender it made her heart skip. "You don't sleep," she realized. "Not really. Sometimes I enter a state that's close to sleep, but it's not necessary." His hand came up to brush hair from her face. "I hope you don't mind that I watched you. You're beautiful when you dream. That's only slightly creepy." But she was smiling, feeling more rested than she had in months. "What time is it?" "Nearly 2 in the afternoon. You slept for almost 12 hours. Nora sat up, alarmed. "I have work tomorrow today." "What day is it?" "Saturday. You have tomorrow off." Elias sat up as well, somehow looking perfect despite having been awake all night. "But if you need to go home, I'll arrange transportation, though I was hoping you'd stay a bit longer. There's more I want to show you." Nora considered. She should probably go home, process everything, maybe talk to her best friend Charlotte about the fact that she'd apparently been claimed as a vampire bride. But the thought of leaving this sanctuary, this man, made something in her chest protest. "Show me," she said instead. "But I need coffee first, a lot of coffee." Elias's smile was radiant. "I had some sent up an hour ago. I remembered you take it with cream and 2 sugars. The fact that he'd remembered such a small detail from their coffee shop dates made something warm bloom in Nora's chest. She let him lead her to a small table by the window, the one that looked out onto the impossible garden, where a full breakfast spread was waiting. Coffee, pastries, fresh fruit, eggs cooked exactly how she liked them. "How did you know?" she started. "I've paid attention to everything about you for 6 months," Elias reminded her. "Your coffee order, your breakfast preferences, the fact that you hate mushrooms but love tomatoes. I want to know everything, Nora. Every tiny detail that makes you who you are." It should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like being cherished. Like someone finally seeing her completely and loving what they found. They ate well. Nora ate while Elias watched with what could only be called fascination and talked about lighter things. Her job at the library, his attempts to modernize vampire education systems, her family back in Minnesota, his frustration with technology despite having lived through its entire evolution. "I still don't understand Twitter," he admitted. "Why would anyone care what I'm thinking at any given moment?" "Instagram," Nora corrected, laughing. "Twitter is something else entirely. Though honestly, I don't get most social media either. I just post pictures of books. I'd like to see that. Your account, I mean." Nora pulled out her phone, surprised to find it still had battery, and showed him her modest Instagram presence. Pictures of library displays, new acquisitions, her cats, the occasional selfie. Elias studied each one with serious attention, like they were important historical documents. "You have cats," he said, something in his voice odd. "2, Darcy and Lizzie. They're probably furious I didn't come home last night." Worry spiked through her. "Actually, I need to check on them. I sent someone to your apartment this morning to feed them and change their water, Elias said calmly. I hope that's all right. I didn't want you to worry. Nora stared at him. You sent someone to feed my cats. I have people who handle things. It seemed logical. You're ridiculous. But she was grinning, feeling absurdly touched. Thank you. They're probably plotting my murder anyway, but at least they're fed. After breakfast, Elias took her deeper into the palace. He showed her the throne room, a massive space carved from living rock with a throne that looked like it had been grown rather than built. The armory, filled with weapons from every era of human history. The blood bank, a medical facility that looked more like a high-tech hospital than anything vampiric. We have agreements with hospitals and blood donation centers, Elias explained as they walked past. No vampire in my territory is permitted to feed from unwilling humans. It's one of my strictest laws. What happens if they break it? Nora asked. His expression went cold. They're executed, publicly. I won't allow my people to be monsters. It was a reminder that for all his gentleness with her, Elias was fundamentally a king. A powerful ancient being who ruled through strength and fear as much as love. But somehow that didn't scare her. If anything, it made her feel safer knowing that the person who'd claimed her as his bride had both the power and the will to protect her from anything. The last place he took her was a library that made Nora actually gasp. It was enormous, stretching up at least 3 stories, every wall covered in books. Rolling ladders, cozy reading nooks, a massive fireplace, skylights that showed the underground garden above. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of. This is yours, Elias said softly. If you stay, if you choose to be my queen, this will be your personal library. I've been collecting books for 800 years, and I'd be honored if you'd take care of them. Nora couldn't speak. She walked through the space in a daze, running her fingers over spines, recognizing first editions and rare manuscripts and books that shouldn't exist outside of museums. It was overwhelming. It was perfect. It was everything she never knew she wanted. You can't just give me a library, she finally managed. I can give you anything I want. I'm a king. But his voice was gentle. And I want to give you this. A space that's yours, where you can read and think and be yourself without any pressure to be anything else. A sanctuary within my sanctuary. Nora turned to him, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand how this is my life. A week ago I was worried about making rent and whether my library branch would survive budget cuts. Now I'm standing in a palace with a vampire king who wants to give me a library and make me his queen. It's too much. It's too fast. Elias crossed to her immediately, pulling her into his arms. Then we slow down. We take all the time you need. The library isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. We'll court properly, dates, conversations, letting you get comfortable with my world. And if you decide it's not what you want, I'll accept that. Though it will destroy me. You keep saying that, but I don't think you understand. Nora pulled back to look at him. I'm already halfway in love with you. Maybe more than halfway. But I'm terrified of losing myself in all of this. Of becoming the vampire king's human bride instead of Nora Pemberton, who loves books and cats and terrible romantic comedies. Then don't. His hands framed her face. Be exactly who you are. That's all I want, Nora, in all her complicated, brilliant, beautiful humanity. The title is just words. You're the substance. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough for your world? You faced down a room full of hostile vampires last night and didn't break. You listened to my darkest stories without flinching. You're stronger than you think, Nora. He kissed her forehead. But you don't have to be strong all the time. That's what I'm here for. To protect you, support you, catch you when you fall. Let me be your strength when yours runs out. Nora pressed her face into his chest, breathing in his scent. I want to try. I want to see where this goes. But I need to do it my way, keep my job, my apartment, my life while we figure this out. I can't just move into a vampire palace and become someone new overnight, of course. Elias's voice was warm with relief. Whatever pace you need. Though I reserve the right to send cars to pick you up for dates and have food delivered to your apartment when you forget to eat because you're reading. You're going to spoil me. That's the plan. He pulled back to look at her seriously. But I need you to understand something. By claiming you as my bride, I've made you a target. The vampires I banished last night, they have allies, old families with power and resources. They're going to see you as a weakness, a way to get to me. I'll protect you with everything I have, but your life just got more dangerous. Great, Nora said dryly. My mom is going to love this. Hey Mom, I'm dating a vampire king and now ancient undead nobles want to kill me. Pass the potatoes. Despite everything, Elias laughed, a genuine surprise sound. You joke about this? It's either joke or have a complete breakdown, and I've already cried twice today. I'm at my limit. But she was smiling too. Though seriously, what do I tell my family, my friends? Do I just drop I'm dating a vampire into casual conversation? That's up to you. Elias was serious again. Some humans who partner with vampires choose to tell their families, others don't. There are risks either way. Knowledge can be dangerous, but so can ignorance. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Nora thought about her parents, traditional and religious, who still hadn't accepted that she dropped out of law school to get her library science degree. About Charlotte, her best friend since college, who would either think this was the coolest thing ever or stage an intervention. About her brother, overprotective and suspicious, who interrogated every guy she dated. I need to think about it, she said finally. Figure out how to explain this in a way that doesn't sound completely insane. Take your time. He kissed her softly. For now, why don't I take you home? You probably want to shower, change, spend some time in your own space. And I have council business to attend to. Banishing a dozen nobles creates paperwork. Apparently, paperwork. Vampires do paperwork. That's somehow the weirdest thing I've learned today. We're immortal, not disorganized. The drive back to Nora's apartment was in a car that was definitely too expensive for Chicago streets, driven by a vampire chauffeur who kept sneaking curious glances at her in the rearview mirror. Elias held her hand the entire way, occasionally pressing kisses to her knuckles like he couldn't help himself. When they pulled up outside her building, a converted brownstone in a decent neighborhood, Elias walked her to her door. I'll call you tonight, he promised. And I'd like to take you out tomorrow, if you're free. Somewhere normal, human, where we can just be together without vampire politics. I'd like that. Nora stood on her toes to kiss him, and he made a soft sound of pleasure, his arms coming around her to deepen it. They stood there on her doorstep, kissing like teenagers, until a neighbor loudly cleared their throat and they broke apart, both slightly dazed. Tomorrow, Elias repeated, his voice rough. Tomorrow, Nora agreed. She watched him leave, then finally let herself into her apartment. Darcy and Lizzie, her two orange tabbies, immediately swarmed her with angry meows and aggressive leg rubs. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with bookshelves and plants and her comfortable lived-in things. Nora sank onto her couch, cats piling onto her lap, and let herself just breathe. She'd survived, she'd met vampires, been claimed by a vampire king, and somehow made it through without completely falling apart. Her life had fundamentally changed in the span of a single night, and she had no idea what came next. But as she sat there thinking about silver eyes and cold hands and a voice that promised forever, she realized she wasn't afraid. She was excited, terrified and excited, and more alive than she'd ever been. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Already missing you. Nora smiled and typed back, how did you get my number? I'm a vampire king, I have resources. Also, you put it on your library business cards. That's for patrons with reference questions, not stalking. I'll have you know I'm courting, not stalking. There's a distinct difference, is there? Courting involves flowers and poetry, stalking involves binoculars. I haven't used binoculars once. Nora laughed out loud, startling the cats. This ridiculous, powerful, ancient being was flirting with her via text message. Her life was officially insane. You're ridiculous, she texted back, but you like it. Unfortunately, I'll pick you up at 7 tomorrow. Wear something comfortable. And Nora? Yes? Thank you for giving me a chance. I won't waste it. Nora clutched her phone to her chest, feeling warm and hopeful and slightly hysterical. She was really doing this. Dating a vampire, possibly falling in love with one, potentially becoming a queen in a world she barely understood. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was perfect. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that was almost normal, if you ignored the vampire part. Elias picked her up for dates, sometimes fancy restaurants where vampires and humans mingled carefully, sometimes quiet walks through parks at night, once a private showing at an art museum where he told her stories about the artists he'd known personally. He was charming and attentive and never pushed for more than she was ready to give. But the vampire world kept intruding. The first time was 3 days after the banquet. Nora was shelving books at the library when a woman approached, beautiful, pale, with white hair barely concealed under a designer scarf. You're Nora Pemberton. It wasn't a question. Nora's instincts screamed danger. Can I help you find something? I'm Valentina, Lady Seraphine's daughter. The vampire smiled, showing just a hint of fang. I wanted to see the human who captured our king's attention. You're not what I expected. Is that supposed to be an insult, an observation? Valentina circled her slowly, and Nora fought the urge to run. My mother is furious, you know. Banished after 400 years of loyal service, all because she spoke the truth about you. She was cruel. Nora's voice was steadier than she felt. There's a difference between truth and cruelty, perhaps. Valentina stopped in front of her. But you should understand something, little human. Elias may be powerful, but he can't watch you every moment. And there are many of us who don't appreciate the changes you represent. Be careful. Accidents happen. Then she was gone, moving with vampire speed, leaving Nora shaking in the middle of the stacks. She called Elias immediately. He was there in 10 minutes, fury radiating off him in waves. She threatened you. His voice was deadly quiet. In broad daylight, in a public space, she threatened you. She didn't actually threaten me, Nora said, though her hands were still trembling. She just implied that accidents happen. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing in vampire culture. Elias pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. She'll be dealt with. What does that mean? He looked at her, and for a moment she saw the king rather than the man she was falling for. It means I'm going to make very clear that touching you means death. Threatening you means exile. Even looking at you the wrong way will have consequences. You can't protect me from everyone. Watch me. His expression softened slightly. I know you value your independence. I know you want to keep living your normal life. But I won't apologize for keeping you safe, Nora. Not when the alternative is losing you. They argued about it, Nora insisting she didn't need a bodyguard, Elias insisting that she absolutely did. They compromised on increased security that was supposed to be subtle, though Nora definitely noticed the vampires who started showing up in the library at odd hours, pretending to read. The second incident was worse. Nora was walking home from dinner with Charlotte, who'd taken the vampire revelation surprisingly well, mostly because she thought Elias was ridiculously hot and also rich. So why are you even hesitating? When 3 men stepped out of an alley. Not vampires, humans, but their eyes had the glazed look of people under compulsion. The pretty one wants you gone, one of them said in a monotone. Says you're poisoning the king. Says you need to die. They had knives. Nora opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound came out, there was a blur of motion and suddenly Isadora was there. Elias's vampire sister moved like violence in silk, disarming all 3 men in seconds. She snapped her fingers in front of their faces and the glaze cleared from their eyes. They looked around in confusion, clearly not remembering how they'd gotten there. Go home, Isadora commanded, using vampire compulsion. Forget this. You spent the evening at home watching television. The men wandered off, and Isadora turned to Nora with concern. Are you hurt? No, but they were compelled. Someone made them, I know. Isadora's face was grim. This is escalating. The old families are using humans as weapons because they know Elias won't kill humans to protect you. We need to get you to the palace now. Nora wanted to argue, but her hands were shaking too badly. She let Isadora lead her to a waiting car, and within 20 minutes she was back in the obsidian palace, wrapped in Elias's arms while he held her like she might disappear. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you better. You can't anticipate everything. But Nora was crying now, the terror finally catching up with her. Elias, they wanted to kill me. Ordinary humans who got compelled into murder. How do we fight that? We end this. His voice was steel. I've been too lenient, too patient. I thought giving the old families time to adjust would work. But they're not adjusting, they're escalating. So I'm going to give them a choice. Accept you as my queen or leave my territory permanently. That'll start a war. Then we'll have a war. He pulled back to look at her, his silver eyes blazing. I won't sacrifice you for peace, Nora. I won't let them hurt you to maintain some illusion of unity. You're more important than all of it. Over the next week, Elias moved with brutal efficiency. He called a council of all the major vampire families in his territory, not a request, a summons. And he made Nora sit beside him in the throne room, wearing a dress Isadora had helped her pick out, her hand clasped firmly in his. The throne room was packed with vampires, all ancient, all powerful, all staring at her with varying degrees of hostility and curiosity. Nora wanted to hide. Instead, she sat up straight and met their gazes, refusing to show fear. Elias stood and the room fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. For 800 years I have led this territory. I have protected you, guided you, kept you safe through centuries of change and danger. In return, I have asked for loyalty and respect. Recently, some of you have forgotten what those words mean. He let that sink in, his eyes scanning the crowd. Nora Pemberton is my chosen bride, my intended queen. By our laws, by our traditions, that makes her untouchable. Yet there have been threats, attacks, attempts on her life. This ends now. A murmur ran through the crowd. Elias continued, his voice hardening. I am offering one chance and one chance only. Those who cannot accept my choice, who cannot show my queen the respect she deserves, have 1 week to leave my territory. After that deadline, anyone who threatens her, attacks her, or shows her disrespect will be executed. Not exiled, not punished, executed. Publicly. The murmur became an uproar. Vampires shouting objections, calling it tyranny, demanding he reconsider. Elias let them rage for exactly 30 seconds, then he moved. He was suddenly in the middle of the crowd, and the vampire who'd been shouting loudest, an ancient male named Draven, was on his knees with Elias's hand wrapped around his throat. "Does anyone else have objections?" Elias's voice was conversational, but his eyes were completely black. "Because I'm happy to demonstrate exactly how serious I am." Nobody spoke. Nora's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest, but she kept her face calm, regal even. This was who Elias was, gentle with her, brutal with threats. King in every sense of the word. Elias released Draven and returned to the throne, to her side. His hand found hers again, squeezing gently. "You have 1 week, choose wisely." The council ended in tense silence. As vampires filed out, Nora could feel their eyes on her, assessing, calculating, some hostile, some merely curious. When the room was finally empty except for Elias, Isadora, and a few trusted guards, Nora finally let herself breathe. "That was terrifying," she admitted. "You were magnificent." Elias pulled her to her feet, into his arms. "You sat there like you were born to be queen, like you belonged in that throne." "I was faking it. I was absolutely faking it." "Then you're an excellent actress." He kissed her softly. "I know I'm asking too much of you. I know this isn't the life you imagined, but I meant what I said. You're more important than any of this." Nora looked up at him, this impossible, ancient, powerful being who'd upended his entire world for her. "I love you," she said, and felt him go absolutely still. "I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I do. I love you, Elias Lorentis. All of you, the king and the man, the protector and the gentle soul who reads poetry and remembers how I take my coffee. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." The look on his face was worth every moment of fear, every threat, every horrible dinner party. "Say it again. I love you. Again, I love you. You dramatic vampire." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of 800 years of loneliness finally finding home. When they broke apart, he was trembling. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you cry over a sad ending in that library. I will love you for every moment of forever you'll give me. Marry me, Nora. Be my queen, my partner, my reason for existing. Say yes." "That's the worst proposal ever," Nora said. But she was crying and laughing at the same time. "You just threatened to execute people and now you're proposing?" "I'm a vampire. We're dramatic. It's our thing." But his eyes were serious, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "Say yes, please." Nora thought about her small apartment, her library job, her normal human life, about the danger, the politics, the centuries of complications, about the fact that she'd known this man for less than a month and he was asking her to be his forever. Then she thought about silver eyes that looked at her like she hung the stars, about cold hands that touched her with infinite gentleness, about a voice that promised protection, devotion, love that would outlast empires, about feeling more alive, more seen, more cherished than she had in her entire life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be your queen. I'll figure out this vampire world and I'll probably make a million mistakes. But yes, always yes." Elias's smile was blinding. He kissed her again, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around the throne room while Isadora whooped in the background and guards tried very hard to pretend they weren't watching. "When?" he asked when he finally set her down. "How soon can we do this properly? I need to tell my family first, and we should probably date a little longer, like normal people." "We're not normal people. I'm a vampire king and you're about to be a vampire queen. Normal doesn't apply." But he was grinning. "Though I will give you time to tell your family, and we can have whatever kind of wedding you want, human, vampire, or both." "Both," Nora decided. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Merge both worlds." The wedding planning was chaos. Nora's family flew in from Minnesota, her mother simultaneously thrilled about the wedding and horrified by the vampire thing. Her father threatening to kill Elias multiple times before Nora explained he literally couldn't. Her brother demanding a prenup until Elias showed him the actual castle and vast wealth. Charlotte was delighted and appointed herself maid of honor, immediately bonding with Isadora over wedding dress shopping. The vampire community was divided. Some families left the territory as threatened, refusing to accept a human queen. Others stayed, curious or pragmatic enough to adapt, and slowly, as they saw Elias's devotion, as they watched Nora navigate their complex politics with grace and intelligence, opinions began to shift. 3 months after that first disastrous dinner, Nora stood in the palace garden, the impossible one underground, wearing a dress that looked like starlight. Elias waited at the end of an aisle lined with both humans and vampires, looking at her like she was his salvation. They were married by a human officiant and a vampire elder, blending traditions in a ceremony that would have been impossible a year ago. When Elias kissed her as his wife, his queen, applause erupted from both sides of the aisle. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "My queen, my heart, my Nora." "I love you too," she whispered back. "My king, my protector, my Elias." The reception was a careful dance of politics and genuine celebration. Nora's family mingled awkwardly with vampires who tried very hard to seem normal and not scary. Charlotte flirted outrageously with vampire nobles who didn't quite know what to make of her. Isadora gave a speech that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure. And Elias never left Nora's side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes tracking her every movement like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. Near midnight, they slipped away from the celebration to a private balcony overlooking the underground city. Nora leaned against the railing, Elias's arms wrapped around her from behind, and looked out at their kingdom. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "Not even one." She turned in his arms to face him. "Though I reserve the right to panic when I realize I'm actually queen of a vampire territory and have no idea what I'm doing. We'll figure it out together." He kissed her forehead. "You and me against the world. Human and vampire. Mortal and immortal. For however long we have about that." Nora took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your offer, about eternity." Elias went very still. "And, not yet. I want to live as human for a while longer. Figure out who I am in this new life before I make that choice. But someday?" She looked up at him seriously. "Someday I think I'll want forever with you. Not because I'm afraid of dying, but because I want to see what the next 800 years look like by your side." The joy in his expression was almost painful to witness. "Whenever you're ready. Or never, if that's what you choose. I'll take whatever you give me and count myself blessed. You're going to make me cry at my own wedding. You're already crying. Shut up and kiss me." He did, soft and sweet and full of promise. And as they stood there on that impossible balcony in an underground palace, surrounded by a world that shouldn't exist, Nora felt something settle in her chest. This was home, this beautiful, dangerous, complicated world, this ancient vampire who loved her with everything in his eternal soul. She was exactly where she belonged years past. Nora grew into her role as queen, earning respect through intelligence, compassion, and a surprising knack for vampire politics. She modernized their laws, established better relations with human authorities, and created programs to help newly turned vampires adapt to immortality without losing their humanity. The old families who'd left eventually returned, drawn back by the stability and prosperity of Elias's territory. Some even apologized to Nora, acknowledging that her presence had made their world better, not worse. And through it all, Elias loved her with a devotion that never wavered. He protected her fiercely, supported her completely, and looked at her like she was a miracle even on the days when she felt ordinary. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat in their private library reading together, Nora finally spoke the words she'd been considering for months. "I'm ready." Elias looked up from his book. "Ready for what?" "Eternity, with you." She took his hand. "I've lived, I've grown, I've figured out who I am in this world, and I want forever. I want to stand beside you not for 50 years but for 5,000. I want to see what comes next, what we build together. I'm ready, Elias." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "Are you certain? Once it's done, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything." She squeezed his hand. "Turn me. Make me yours in every way. Let's be forever." The transformation was brutal but necessary. Elias stayed with her through every moment of pain, his voice guiding her, his presence anchoring her. When she finally woke 3 days later, the world was different, sharper, clearer, more vibrant. And her reflection showed white hair, pale skin, eyes that glowed with new power. She was vampire, she was queen, she was eternal, and she was home. "How do you feel?" Elias asked, watching her with concern and hope. Nora turned to him, seeing him with new eyes, the true depth of his beauty, the power that radiated from him, the love that shone so bright it almost hurt. "I feel perfect. I feel like I'm finally seeing everything clearly. And I feel like I'm ready to spend the next eternity reminding you why you fell in love with a plus-size librarian from Minnesota." Elias laughed, the sound pure joy. "I fell in love with you because you're brilliant, brave, and beautiful in every possible way. The rest was just details." "Good answer." She pulled him close, reveling in the strength of her new body, the cold that now matched his. "Now kiss me, Vampire King. We have forever to get started on." He did, and it was like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. They had centuries ahead of them, challenges and triumphs, changes and constants, but always together. Always forever. The nobles had sneered at his plus-size bride once. Now they bowed to their queen, powerful and eternal, who'd proven that love didn't care about old prejudices or impossible odds. Who'd shown them that sometimes the best revolutions start with a single brave choice to love against all logic. And in the Obsidian Palace beneath Chicago, in the library filled with centuries of stories, the Vampire King and his queen began their greatest adventure yet, an eternity of love, partnership, and proving that some fairy tales are real after all. just with more vampires and significantly less patience for aristocratic nonsense. The end came naturally, not with drama but with peace. Years later, decades really, when people asked Nora what it was like to be vampire queen, she'd smile and say it was like any good love story. Terrifying and wonderful, complicated and simple, absolutely insane and perfectly right. And when they asked if she regretted giving up her human life, she'd look at Elias, still impossibly beautiful, still devoted, still looking at her like she hung the stars, and say no. Never, not for a single moment, because some loves are worth the risk, worth the danger, worth upending your entire world and becoming something new. Theirs was one of them. And they had forever to prove it.